Just to add insult to injury about this whole Commonwealth Games fiasco, the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, texted Prime Minister Anthony Albanese this morning to tell him that the games were off, he pulled the rug, couldn't afford it. You reckon he would have made a phone call or actually made the time to see him face to face and say, look, mate, we've got some problems here. We're running out of money. The state's broke. I might have to pull the rug on the games. But no, he sent him a text message. I mean, how insulting is that, as I mentioned, to all those young people and all the people who've put in hours of work so far to get this thing off the ground? It's typical Daniel Andrews. He does not care. Now, still to come, the worrying push of China in the Pacific with the Solomon Islands. I thought we'd sorted that all out. Didn't Penny Wong say it was all fine and that Australia had sent a whole bunch of money over there and the people in the Solomon Islands love us again? I'll have a look at that coming up between now and the end of the program. But first to our international panel, we have Sky News contributor Kosha Gada and former Labor MP Michael Danby. Kosha, Michael, welcome. Michael, I want to start with you. You've been in Israel in recent days. I spent last week in Japan. I want you to go first. How does it feel in Israel on the ground, where you've been plenty of times, compared to being back in Australia, Victoria in particular?
Israel's sort of like an intense version of Melbourne and Sydney, especially the Tel Aviv area, which I spend a lot of time in. If you think prices have gone up in Australia, Steve, or even in Japan, the gig economy's really taken over there, and people have got a lot of money, but things are so expensive. So it's a lot of fun. It's like all of the cafe districts and restaurants and fun places of Melbourne and Sydney put into one area, and this is Tel Aviv in particular, but better weather.
I've been to Japan 13 times in 15 years, and every time I go there, Kosha, I get this feeling that they have this great ability to solve problems. They move large numbers of people efficiently right around. I was in Tokyo and then north. I mean, Haneda Airport, for example, compare it to Melbourne Airport. It's got rail links above and below ground. It's got buses linking 3 terminals. You can get in and out of that place perfectly well. It's got 3 terminals in one place. Compare that to Tullamarine. I got off a plane on Sunday morning. The baggage hall was so packed it took 2 hours to get out of there. It's almost like a third world country, that airport out at Tullamarine.
There's nothing like traveling to some of these places that really kind of shines a light, I guess, on differences in efficiency, or inefficiency, I should say, for sure. And these are very densely populated countries, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, and they still do many, many things very, very well. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, and there's probably structural and cultural reasons that explain that in part.
Yeah, well, we just getting a rail line to Tullamarine will be a start. Kosha, the Prime Minister said he remains, quote, likely to visit China by the end of the year. This is despite calls for him to delay the trip following, as we know, Beijing's detention of Australian journalists Cheng Lei and Yang Huyen, and the continuation of those trade sanctions. Should he actually still go? In my view, he should, but what do you think?
I agree. I think, the cold, hard reality, or some would say an inconvenient truth, is the trade dependency that Australia has on China, and the reality that they are the =1 trading partner of Australia. And in reverse, I think Australia is the 13th largest trading partner of China. So once you look at that, it doesn't make sense. You have to have a balanced view of the relationship, and it doesn't make sense to necessarily snub them, even though we want to correct certain wrongs around different policies and right the ship around the trade bans that they're putting on there and all of that. I think Australia's just always going to have to figure out how to balance that relationship, and it's not going to be easy. I think these things are sort of about posturing and stagecraft a little bit, but unless there's a structural recalibration of the economic relationship, none of that's going to change, and Prime Minister probably will and should go.
Michael, you wonder what sort of reception you'll get, given that we're about to launch the biggest military operation in the Northern Territory between the US and Australia that we've had ever, and that a US warship's about to be crowned as the USS Canberra in Sydney Harbour tomorrow. I don't know that the Chinese will be all that happy about that.
No, and they won't be. The more of the long term, the vote of the US Congressional Committee to okay the leasing or the sale of the Virginia-class nuclear boats to Australia. But we've shown that China can live with us. They started buying our coal again. They've always been buying our iron ore. We just don't concede on our foreign policy and our national human rights policy. We continue to trade with them as a normal country. But I think it's very difficult for Albo, Steve, if the human rights issues and the individual Australians aside, if he doesn't get any concessions on some of the other bans they've put on Australian products, it's going to look very embarrassing. They should at least offer some specific rewards for that visit.
Well, you know how this works. I mean, there'd be talks going on in the background. They probably may have done a deal on wine or something, and it'll be announced when he gets there.